So, okay, so let me just really quickly talk process just for a heartbeat. And then if there's more questions about process, maybe we can get into that. Process is a kind of a tough place to start, but I'm doing this to emphasize that we are at the beginning. And so there's a lot of concern, maybe because there's a concern that we have it all figured out and everyone's scrambling to get information. What is the Forest Service doing about this? What are these specific actions? Have you thought about this? We're at the beginning. And so what's going to be happening is that this summer we have specialists who are going to be going out in the field to collect data, to get a sense for where things are at. And then we're going to start our analysis, and we'll start going through our analysis. And then there's going to be, we will actually create the analysis and we'll send it back out for public comment. Our draft environmental assessment will go out for public comment next spring. So there's going to be more public engagement, and we can continue to answer questions and update our information as possible, you know, throughout the life of the project, even when we're not in these very specific windows that we're in right now, around a scoping period and a draft comment period that have like specific deadlines. That's process. So just to contextualize where we're at right now, what we're doing, why we're asking for feedback. So right now we're looking at doing a lot of this work, doing our assessment work, analysis work, getting some feedback from the public and from our own, you know, internal knowledge of the resource to say, well, maybe these are some of the concerns that we have. Here are some issues that we need to watch out for, and what do we need to think about when we do our analysis, and do we need different alternatives? What would those alternatives look like? So all of that is coming. Taking a step back from that, you know, the reason you guys are all on the call, maybe underneath that initial concern of what's going on, what's already on the table and where are we at, is because you care about this place. And I want to acknowledge that, and I treasure that. I love being part of a community of people that loves the forest and loves the land and cares about it for a whole range of reasons. I share that, you know, and our job in the Forest Service is to ensure that that can continue into perpetuity. So, you know, a lot of people really, really value the forest for really big old growth forests, really big old trees. Awesome. I value those things too, and so does the agency, and our laws protect a lot of that. There are some people who really, like Titti was mentioning, really love being able to get outside and accessing the national forest. I value those things too. The Forest Service values it. Our laws and regulations promote that. There are some people who really value being able to practice their traditional practices and with their elders and pass that along to their children by gathering huckleberry, for instance, which is something we've looked at for this project. That's also our responsibility to ensure that that can continue indefinitely. So we are really trying to carry all of these pieces of what we all care about, right? These fundamental values forward sustainably, as long as we can, indefinitely, forever. That's our job. And I care about that a lot. If I could have you walking away with one thing, maybe it's to recognize that that is the scope and scale of what our mission is in the agency. And that's pretty much what guides us. Our forests on the MtBaker-Snoqualmie and in this area, some of them are great. Some of them are not great. And we have a range of reasons why we want them to be a little bit more resilient. You know, we've got increasing climate change impacts on our forests, for instance. So we've got hotter, drier conditions. That stresses trees out. If trees are stressed out, they're not as resilient against insects and disease. One thing that we're starting to see is some Doug fir beetle coming into the forest, for instance. If our trees are a lot more stressed out, then they may not as easily fight off insects and disease. And it's a lot harder for trees to push those things out and to be resilient if they don't have access to water and nutrients and sunlight, depending on the species. So there's a whole range of reasons. I'll get into more of that later, but we do have some concerns about our forests. We also know that over time, as climate change continues, that it's important for our climate change vulnerability assessment, actually in 2015 said we really need to be looking at the whole patchwork of what we have on the landscape and ensure that we have some representative of the range of ecosystems on this landscape. This is like a key climate change strategy, is having a bit of, you know, making sure that we're representing the range of habitat types. That's a piece of our consideration. There's a whole bunch of things. Okay, so I wanted to emphasize that it's pretty important to us that these forests are in good condition from now and into the future indefinitely. And we have some concerns about how some of our forests are right now, not all of them, but some of them. And in some of those places, we have laws and regulations that allow us to do something about that. And that's the part of the landscape we're looking at. So I might dive in to the story map. Well, actually, before I do, let me say one more thing, which is recognizing, you know, Titti mentioned that this project started as something called the NICE project, which, you know, I thought was a really fun name, the Nooksack Integrated Conservation and Enhancement Project. And this was started at, you know, we kicked this off a couple years ago, a number of years ago. And what that project entailed essentially was a couple of community meetings in Glacier. So we hosted a few public meetings. We had a story map at the time. We accepted comment. I engaged with various organizations a couple times, maybe 2 times. And we, as a Forest Service, sort of collected in a holistic way. The whole North Fork Nooksack watershed was considered. And we looked at what are the range of activities that we can be doing in that whole watershed. So it included vegetation management, which is what this project focuses on. It also included recreation pieces, a few restoration pieces, a few sort of infrastructure pieces. We ended up with probably 20 different ideas for projects. And that's as far as that got. So that was a big picture. What's on the table? What do we need to be thinking about? And that's as far as the NICE project got. And I had been thinking at the time that I really wanted to do a big, comprehensive, holistic analysis, right? This project that we're doing now is an analysis. I wanted to integrate all of those pieces into one analysis document. And, you know, the reality of it is that having a whole bunch of really different projects in one planning document can be confusing, and it can be really time consuming, and might inhibit our ability to do the work on the ground that, frankly, collectively, I think a lot of us really want to see happen, including recreation projects, including some road maintenance projects. I mean, all of these things would all get tangled up in a project that, with more components, the more complex it gets, and the longer it can take. And so we said, you know what, okay, let's take a step back. For the planning purposes, the biggest project that we have is probably this vegetation component, which I will tell you that the vegetation component that we have now is not different than what we offered in the NICE project. And then we can explore doing planning projects for the other components through other means that we have that will make it more efficient and effective to get those done. So we decoupled them, but this is not to say that we're not doing them. They just got decoupled for the purposes of our process so that we don't unintentionally delay our ability to do any of the work, which is what I was fearful of. So I'm going to stop there. Maybe one more thing I'll say is that, you know, I didn't get a lot of feedback from the NICE project. I worked pretty hard to try to get feedback, and I did have a couple of meetings. I wouldn't say it was not an intensive process, and it didn't become a proposal even. It was a sensing of what needed to happen on the landscape and some visioning pieces about what was important. So we took that information and fed it into what's important in this landscape. Part of it's the vegetation management. Other pieces are also on the table right now, including, for instance, the Hannigan Trailhead, which might be a concern for some folks, including some, you know, continuing to look at how we can implement some of our road improvements. All those are on the table.